With the advent of second-generation designs, American manufacturers began solidifying practices which saw the introduction of lighter, more agile TSFs. Combat doctrines worldwide had solidified over the past decade of conflict, with many nations seeking to address the needs and capabilities of their militaries when combating the Beta. For the United States Armed Forces, factors such as overwhelming firepower, pilot survivability, and logistical dominance would lead to a focus in TSFs intended for both long-range battle against the Beta, as well as superiority in anti-TSF combat. The F-15E Strike Eagle is an entirely reworked upgrade over its sibling, the F-15C. Despite sharing many similarities in function and appearance, it could be argued that internally, it is a completely different machine. Developed by McDonnell Douglas and deployed in 1995, the Strike Eagle was chosen by the US Army due to a comparatively lower cost in refurbishing as opposed to its competitor, the F-16XL. This was due largely to the saturation of F-15 parts already in mass production, which could implement upgrades with less of a price in the way of time and funding. During its development, the United States had begun to focus on G-bomb related doctrines. Yet the US Army's demand for the Strike Eagle ran counter to that approach. Their intent was to expand upon the numbers and abilities of their TSF forces, modernizing older machines in order to keep them relevant, rather than simply phasing them out due to alternative options presented by the G-bomb. This was coupled with the meandering production rollout of the F-22A, which had been intended to replace the F-15C entirely. Thus, the Eagle series remained a highly practical and readily available machine, leading to the F-15E's adoption as the Army's next mainline craft. Logistically, American manufacturers could then continue producing a consistent supply of Eagle components at their factories, exporting them to UN forces and frontline nations by sharing relevant parts between the Eagle and Strike Eagle. Considered a 2.5 generation TSF, the Strike Eagle shares much of its loadout with the F-15C. It uses the AMWS-21 Combat System assault cannon, and carries at least one CIWS-1A close combat knife. It is powered by two Pratt & Whitney FE100 PW220 engines. These jump units were originally designed for the Advanced Tactical Surface Fighter, or ATSF, program for conceptual use with the F-22 before being adopted into the Strike Eagle's design instead. Where the F-15E displays its quality is through its numerous upgrades. Internally, the avionics were improved, and almost all parts were exchanged for newer versions, leading to objectively better performance than the F-15C. Externally, while it retained the same appearance, it makes use of more advanced composite armor. These newer materials strengthened its durability without sacrificing mobility. It also had the ability to purge its knee storage blocks once they were empty, allowing the pilot to decrease the weight of the craft. The Strike Eagle quickly became the premier workhorse of the US Army. On the battlefield, it delivered in firepower, reliability, and maneuverability, engaging at medium and long ranges as designed. These factors would lead many to consider the F-15 Strike Eagle as the strongest second-generation TSF. Such claims would be put to the test against a variety of opponents. The Strike Eagle has seen a fair amount of combat against the Beta, despite the US's position away from the front lines. It has seen live combat against TSFs as well, such as during the 12-5 incident, where it more than held its own against the Japanese Type 94 Shiranui, a third-generation machine. Outside of the US, the only other organization to utilize the F-15E was the United Nations. Orbital divers of both American and UN affiliation used the Eagle series as their TSF of choice. Expandability had been a core part of the Strike Eagle's design, and it would see future prototypes developed as well. Of these were two F-15 Active Eagles, built and tested as part of a program known as the Phoenix Initiative. The Active Eagle featured an expanded sensor mast, as well as additional sensors mounted on the forearms. Thrusters added to the back and shoulders allowed for greater acceleration and mobility, although it traded away its rear mount pylons in the process. After development, these two units would go on to further testing in the XFJ program, with their data serving as a baseline for the Argus test flights Shiranui 2nd. Another prototype Eagle variant was the F-15E, otherwise known as the Silent Eagle. This was a stealth craft which used similar radar diffusing paint as the F-22. By 2002, the Silent Eagle was heavily marketed as a third-generation machine, able to keep up with the advanced TSF designs of the time. One unit known to pilot the F-15E was the U.S. Army's 174th Tactical Armor Battalion, under the call sign of HEAT. The 174th was originally part of United States Forces Japan, having been stationed there previously before the end of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty. When 1998 saw the Beta invasion of Japan, the HEAT Battalion would fight on Shikoku, working closely with their Japanese counterparts to evacuate refugees from the island. Despite sharing a good rapport with the IJA surface pilots, the HEAT Battalion would eventually be withdrawn from Japanese soil and would not return until 2001. During the 12-5 incident, the HEAT Battalion was subordinate to the 66th Tactical Armor Battalion, call sign Hunter, and was tasked with guarding the pass west of the Hiyakawa Toll Booth ruins in order to secure the escape route of the Japanese head of state. Not only did the Strike Eagles of the 174th engage numerous IJA rebels in their sector, but they were eventually attacked by the ace pilots of the Fuji Training Corps, who inflicted several losses on the Americans and forced them into a gradual retreat. The 174th would continue to fight amid the Hiyakawa ruins, joined by F-22s of the Hunter Battalion as they fended off the Fuji Training Corps and multiple other waves of Shiranuis and Gekashins. A lightweight, second-generation tactical surface fighter, the F-16 Fighting Falcon was created with the purpose of operating alongside heavier TSFs, such as the Tomcat or the Eagle. Developed by General Dynamics, the Fighting Falcon deployed in 1986, joining the US military's growing arsenal of TSFs. It was heavily exported and was used around the world as a replacement for the aging F-4s and F-5s. By the year 2000, its manufacturing and distribution had been acquired by Lockheed Martin, who still continued to produce the craft. Originally, the F-16 had been the creation of a project known as the Lightweight Tactical Surface Fighter Program. The United States, struggling to adapt their weapon designs in time with the ever-changing nature of the war, developed a concept known as the high-low mix. This initiative would pair higher-cost, larger, and more mission-capable TSFs with a supplementary force of lower-cost, simply designed machines which had shorter operating times and less mission capabilities. Much like how the F-4 Phantom had once failed to meet its production and export numbers before being augmented by the simpler F-5 Freedom Fighter, the Lightweight Tactical Surface Fighter program was intended to repeat the success of this concept. Competing against the YF-17 Cobra, the YF-16 won out and was selected by the US Army for mass production, while the Navy would choose the YF-17, later to be known as the F-18 Hornet. During its time in the lightweight TSF program, the F-16 had been affectionately nicknamed the Viper among its first pilots. It is powered by two General Electronics F-110 GE100 jump unit engines. Modern innovations from the F-14 and F-15 were improved upon and applied to the design of its parts as well. Despite its purpose as a cost-efficient, short-ranged craft with little space for future improvement, it remains a high-spec and incredibly maneuverable machine. In combat, the F-16 originally used the WS-16C assault gun before switching to the AMWS-21. Much like with the F-15, extra magazines can be stored in the knee armor blocks, which extend to allow for automatic reloading. The CIWS-1A close combat knife can be stored in these compartments as well. Optionally, and much like the F-18 Super Hornet, the F-16 is capable of mounting two MGM-140 ATAC-MS missile containers onto its shoulder armor blocks. Launchers of this type use a phased radar array to track multiple targets over a relatively short range and guide their warheads around simple obstacles in order to bombard hostile forces. Within the US military, the F-16 is best suited for garrison and base defense due to its shorter operating time. And while the Strike Eagle and Raptor are often relied upon for dealing offensive blows, the Viper is capable of acting as a screen for their advance due to its high mobility in close quarters combat. Yet even with this in mind, it can be argued that the Viper is every bit as capable as the Eagle series in its combat performance. Internationally, the Viper has seen service in the UN forces, European, and Middle Eastern militaries. The UN variant of the F-16C features their signature blue livery with UN decal, and no differences in design or performance. The Benelux Union, consisting of Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, makes use of an A variant known as the F-16AM. This model saw improvements made to its fire control system, its data processing, and its electronic warfare capabilities. The Turkish military also makes use of the F-16, in which several craft participated in the defense of Rhodes, as well as in Operation Cherry Blossom. From the more dogfight-oriented Lavi of the Israeli Defense Force to the Chinese Third United Front's highly customized Jian-10, the F-16 is an immensely popular TSF, of which many derivatives exist. Military personnel have taken to calling these variations the 16s family as a result. One of the military units known for using the F-16 would be the ill-fated 37th Tactical Armor Battalion Estrella of the UN forces. A security force, this unit piloted the F-16C and served alongside a counterpart American battalion, as well as one Soviet battalion in defending Alaska's Yukon base. These units would see their ranks infiltrated by a terrorist group known as the Refugee Liberation Front, leading to the death of most, if not all, personnel in September of 2001. Hijacked by terrorists, the F-16 would take part in live anti-TSF combat during the Yukon base incident, where it was documented using the MGM-140 missile system as well. 2 battalions of Vipers, many acting in autonomous mode, would be used to suppress the UN personnel stationed in and around Yukon base. When engaging a resisting group of UN test pilots, however, the RLF pilots would employ the MGM-140 with minimal effect due to the skill of their opponents within the urban terrain. An overwhelming number of F-16s were subsequently shot down as a result. A successor to the US Navy's F-14 Tomcat, the F-18 Hornet series was a family of TSFs operating on the low end of the high-low mix concept. Tracing its lineage back to the YF-17 Cobra, it was developed jointly between Northrop and McDonnell Douglas for the lightweight tactical surface fighter competition. It would lose out to the YF-16, chosen by the US Army. The Navy, however, would select the YF-17 and have it redesigned as a more carrier-capable TSF, the F-18 Hornet. Its A through D models were first introduced in 1987, where it operated alongside the F-14. Despite being significantly lower in cost and capable of mounting multiple weapons, the Hornet faced several performance issues of its own and was met with a mediocre reception. In response, McDonnell-Douglas announced a refurbishment campaign known as the Hornet 2000 program, which completely overhauled the machine. In 1994, the F-18E and F-18F Super Hornets were deployed for the very first time. The former variant followed a single-seat design, while the latter used a two-seat design similar to the F-14. Initially developed by McDonnell-Douglas, the Boeing Corporation would take over manufacturing in 1996 following a merger. By 2001, the Super Hornet had surpassed the Tomcat in terms of cost to performance. While the F-14 remained a powerful carrier-borne asset and was widely popular among surface pilots, its production value and high maintenance convinced the Navy to abandon the concept of a high-low mix, retiring it earlier than expected. As a result, the Super Hornet would remain as the only tactical surface fighter in use by the US Navy and Marine Corps. In terms of design, its electronics have been strengthened by the refitting of avionics equipment, and it has an expanded sensor suite made possible by enlarging its head module. Newer materials were introduced which allowed for the armor to be reinforced, improving the rigidity and toughness of the airframe. Shoulder-mounted thrusters were added, and an increase in size to the TSF's waist armor and legs allowed for an increase in fuel capacity, thereby extending its uptime. Overall, it was superior in performance to the Legacy Hornet in every way, having successfully addressed many issues. It uses two General Electronics FE414 GE400 jump unit engines. These allow for increased output, allowing the Super Hornet to solve prior shortcomings, such as its poor thrust-to-weight ratio when in a vertical climb. With better engines, design principles, and a larger frame, the F-18 Super Hornet became a craft capable of mounting numerous armaments without suffering in performance. All of this was accomplished while keeping the Hornet series relatively cheap to produce and maintain. In combat, the Super Hornet uses the AMWS-21 assault cannon. Like the Strike Eagle, another 2.5 generation craft, the Super Hornet retains use of its knee compartments for extra magazines, as well as the storage of a CIWS-1A close combat knife. Yet this weapon is hardly used unless in the most dire of circumstances, as carrier-borne TSFs focus their doctrine around long-range bombardment, followed by the possibility of medium-range control and a timely egress in order to rearm. The Navy, having fought across all of Eurasia throughout the Beta War, had developed its TSFs around this doctrine of offshore bombardment and beachhead engagements. For the Super Hornet to accomplish such a mission, it would utilize the MGM-140 ATAC-MS. Much like the Phoenix missile system of its predecessor, the MGM-140 was intended to give the Super Hornet an edge when clearing a Beta-infested shoreline, long enough for friendly forces to land, for the TSFs themselves to establish a quick defensive line. The United States Marine Corps would rely on the Super Hornet just as much in order to accomplish landing operations, if not more so. Alongside their own tactical surface attackers, the F-18E would serve to project the presence of the Marine Corps across Eurasia. While their model was painted in a blue color scheme, the Navy's F-18s were distinguished by a gray paint job. Upholding a strong sense of U.S. military culture, unit livery is often painted on the outward tail fin of each of its jump units. Internationally, variants of the Hornet are in use with many countries, such as Nepal and Australia. As of 2001, the Australian Defence Force makes use of the F-18C as its mainline TSF, and has been gradually introducing the Super Hornet into its arsenal as well. The Chinese 3rd United Front also uses a variant known as the FCK-1 Qingkuo, which has had its cruising time extended in order to conduct coaling operations across the Taiwan Strait. Other designs exist, such as the coalition of Southeast Asian nations F-18AX Raging Hornet, or the Australian prototype F-18 HMRV Smash Hornet. A well-known squadron to use the F-15E would be the United States Marine Corps' VMF-318 Black Knives. Originally serving aboard the carrier USS George Washington, the Black Knives were responsible for running anti-beta culling operations from Yankee Station, near the Gulf of Tonkin. In other, more classified sources, unlimited to our understanding, their squadron would play a prominent role after being transferred to Yokosuka Naval Base, from which they would join the carrier strike group of the USS John F. Kennedy in order to carry out a fateful, dangerous mission. During this ordeal, their surviving members would conduct a desperate defense of the carrier, working alongside US Navy Super Hornets to stall a beta advance despite overwhelming enemy numbers. The premier third-generation TSF of the United States, the F-22 Raptor, is spoken of among surface pilots as a machine to be feared and respected by all who encounter it. Not a single known strategy has proven to be a definitive means to combat the Raptor's stealth capabilities. It is a TSF built for battlefield dominance, and in regards to anti-TSF warfare, it is unparalleled in this role. Manufactured by Lockheed Martin, the F-22A initially deployed in 2001, after a tumultuous procurement period. This was due to America's successful development of the fifth dimensional effect bomb, more commonly known as the G-bomb. Its invention led Congress to reduce funding in TSF production, believing that a better alternative had been found. Despite these cuts, the rollout of the F-22 managed to proceed, albeit with limited numbers, and delayed far behind schedule. The Raptor's origin can be traced back to a rather famous competition between itself and the YF-23 Black Widow, a contest known as the Advanced Tactical Surface Fighter Program. The ATSF competition had been America's next attempt at creating a third-generation machine capable of meeting a multitude of next-generation factors. These TSFs were required to possess the following features: stealth capabilities in the electronic systems to support it, high-speed cruising and long-distance flight with low fuel consumption, a first-look, first-kill capability, and the ability to engage man-made weapons such as TSFs. The so-called G elements and their potential for developing advanced technology led US officials to believe that once the beta had been eradicated, a series of new wars would erupt between surviving nations as they attempted to seize the anomalous resources left within beta hives. In anticipation of these future conflicts, the ATSF competition sought to decide upon a TSF which the US military could use to defend its interests in the post-beta world. Lockheed would propose the YF-22, while Northrop and McDonnell-Douglas would propose the YF-23. Over the course of 4 years, both development teams would produce high-quality machines, both of which constantly overtook one another at multiple points during the competition. By the middle of the ATSF program, the YF-22 was held in higher regard, as it appeared closer to completion as a practical craft. During mock combat trials, however, the YF-23 proved superior due to its better dogfighting capabilities. Yet in the end, the US Army would choose the YF-22. This was due to its comparatively cheaper cost and lower maintenance. As well, the YF-22 was superior in long-range engagements, which were fundamental to US military doctrine after repeated losses against the Beta in close-range combat across Europe. Thus, the F-22 Raptor would join the ranks of the US military's TSF forces and go on to establish its legacy as America's deadliest machine. In combat, the F-22 relies first and foremost on its advanced stealth capabilities. These include systems both passive and active in their function. The paint scheme of the craft is made of a classified material, deflective of radar waves. Heat emissions of the TSF can be purged without detection in order to avoid infrared sensors, and the use of a silent running mode prevents vibrations and acoustic sensors from acquiring the F-22's movements. Should all these systems fail, or the F-22 must engage in direct combat, it can rely on its electronic warfare equipment to actively jam the sensors of opposing TSFs. The Raptor is capable of cruising at high speed, a feature made possible by its state-of-the-art Pratt & Whitney FE119 PW100 engines. Outside of its stealth features, it remains highly mobile in close quarters, even with the design's preference for long-range bombardment. The machine's reaction time can keep up with the Japanese Type 94 Shiranui, allowing the Raptor to deflect attacks at close range before creating distance and striking as the enemy loses sight of it. This, alongside its ability to oppress the enemy long before its presence can be detected, ensures that the F-22 will always dictate the pace of any anti-TSF combat it takes part in. Its armament primarily includes the AMWS-21 assault gun, of which it can carry up to 4 during a sortie. Common practice, however, shows a preference for carrying 2 or 3 at maximum. Limiting the loadout is done to minimize the F-22's radar signature as much as possible. As a result, even though its advanced functions have allowed it to outperform numerous TSFs in both live and mock combat, the F-22 carries relatively less ammunition during an engagement. Yet, a robust logistics system and the employment of Strike Eagles or Fighting Falcons in its immediate vicinity render the F-22's ammo limitations a negligible factor in its lethality. Like all post-second generation American TSFs, the F-22 stores its combat daggers within its knee armor blocks. The CIWS-1B close combat knife is a condensed and foldable combat dagger, created with storage space in mind. The Raptor is not expected to utilize this weapon in combat, nor has it been documented ever needing to, yet engagements against the Beta introduce a myriad of possible scenarios. When fighting against the Beta, the F-22's stealth capabilities give it no advantage whatsoever, and its greatest strength is in its mobility, speed, and long-range attacks. Compared to other American TSFs, all of which rely on assault cannons and firepower, the Raptor's superior design still allows it to thrive at the center of a defense line, alongside its second-generation counterparts. It has also proven to be effective during laser-jagd operations. As of 2001, its engagements against the Beta have been limited, but several units, such as the 65th Combat Training Battalion, the Infinities, participated in Operation Cherry Blossom on January 1, 2002. The F-22A has been banned from all international exports, as its design incorporates US military secrets that cannot afford to be distributed to the world at large. As such, there are no Raptors in service within the UN or in foreign militaries. The standard F-22 is known as the High Rate Production, or HRP model, which features its signature green paint scheme. An earlier iteration is an advanced production variant known as the EMD Phase 2, which was responsible for its final testing before mass production of the HRP model began. The Raptor EMD has a limited production run, with only 9 out of 12 planned machines having been made for test evaluations. It used a different electronic wave absorbing paint than the mass production type, causing the EMD to have a dark blue, almost black color scheme. Despite being a test craft, the Department of Defense expressed a desire to begin training American surface pilots in anti-TSF combat. Consequently, the Raptor EMD was then given to the 65th Combat Training Battalion, otherwise known as the Infinities, They would use the Raptor in an aggressor role, where their combat records in mock engagements would cement the Raptor's unbeatable reputation. 2 of the Infinity's pilots were alleged to have defeated 8 Strike Eagles in a single engagement, and in their hands, the Raptor had fought the F-16 and F-18 over 100 times and never lost. Aside from the 65th, the main unit to utilize the F-22 would be the 66th Tactical Armor Battalion out of Langley, Virginia, better known as the Hunter Battalion. Under the command of Major Alfred Walken, the Hunter Battalion would deploy to Japan during the 12-5 incident, where it would face off against the Type 94 Shiranui in large-scale combat, and earn its famous 7-to-1 kill ratio. Yet, while escorting key VIP figures off the battlefield, Walken and his 3 accompanying wingmates would be shot down during an engagement between Mount Maruno and Mount Iwa. Resultantly, in light of its objectively superior performance, the loss of several Raptors was a heavy blow to the morale of the US Armed Forces. A few select tactical surface fighter prototypes from the US Armed Forces remain to be covered. These will appear in upcoming videos, as well as the TSFs of other nations. As always, a huge shout out goes out to all of the Patreon supporters. You too can always help the war effort by liking, subscribing, or commenting.